medicine, and finish the pot, you'll be fine. You wake up in the morning, everything will be great. And this is how I woke up in the morning. I woke up having suffered from alopecia totalis, which is complete hair loss. Invariably, most of us end up losing it anyway in our middle age, so now it's not particularly significant. But when you're 16 years old, in an institution, as where I grew up, it was a very, 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 very life-forming experience. One day I looked like this, the next day I looked like this, and people treated me in a different way, but I hadn't changed. I was exactly the same Jimmy as the day before. But in a way, it was a very life, and at the time I was unaware that it was a very life-forming experience. I found my way for the next few years. I got to the age of 18, and I decided I don't want to be part of any group. I don't want to be part of any institution. I've had enough. I'm going to find my way. I'm going to find how and where I fit in. I was lost, but I was very determined to find some answers. So I remember as a child reading Tintin in Tibet and being inspired by all these bald, I thought they were bald, shaven monks running around in the mountains. So I thought, that's where I'm going to go. So I bought a one-way ticket. As you heard, I was quite used to traveling on my own. I didn't say goodbye to my parents. I was very angry. And I went to Tibet in 1986. And it was a year after Tibet had become officially open for tourism. It had been shut for the better part of 30 years officially. And by complete, utter naivety, I walked in 1 year from one end of Tibet to the other, half the time dressed as a monk. I took a little camera with me with 6 rolls of Kodak gold, and on the back of the Kodak gold there were these little pictures, clouds, sun, rain, and that's what taught me how to use the aperture. And I made a document of my journey. A year later I came back, showed the pictures to a few people, and they said, well, they're not particularly profound pictures, but your journey is very interesting. We'll publish them and pay you a bit of money. And I thought, right, this is what I'm going to do. I don't need to study, I'm on my way. So for the next few years, I started traveling around the world as a photojournalist. And I think photojournalist is a very grand title, and I went to a number of sort of troubled parts of the planet. To be honest, I was actually only going to find myself. I wasn't a particularly successful photojournalist. I managed to just pay enough each time to buy a new ticket. But in actual fact, I think this journey of discovery has been going on and on and on throughout the whole of my life. And 4 years ago, the circle was complete, and I decided to go on my ultimate journey. That was actually to go back to indigenous cultures, indigenous tribes, and these very profound human experiences. In the meantime, and I'll cut the story very short, I have a family of 3 teenage children, and I've been working as an advertising photographer in Amsterdam. And with the onset of the economic crisis about 5 years ago, my profession started sort of fading. And my wife said, Jimmy, you've got to go back to what you've been busy with for years. Go back to being what's been interesting you, your passion, your research, your whole library is based on this information you've been gathering. You've got to go back and photograph. So this is the journey that I started. I chose 35 tribes or cultures from their aesthetic appearance and their geographical diversity of location, and went on a journey. But what was very profound was, at the very beginning, it was based again on photography and my own discovery and my own sort of middle age and reflection. But I began to come across far more than I'd ever anticipated. Whilst traveling around the world, going to these very, very remote parts of the world and having these fantastic experiences with these cultures, using this traditional old plate camera, which we can discuss if people are interested in technically later after the talk. I began to come across lessons, very, very profound lessons, which began to influence me, began to change me. And 3 of these lessons I'd like to share with you this evening. And again, please forgive me, I don't want to stand here as an evangelist. That's purely my emotional interpretation of what happened to me. And I want to share it with you. Please, you can interpret however you want. Yeah? I'm not dictating anything. And as you heard, I having spent 10 years in a Jesuit boarding school, the last I want to hear is somebody waving a finger around telling me how I should be and how I should think, let alone how I should look. Okay, to begin with, we are in northern Kenya, just south of Lake Chukotka, and we're with a fantastic group of people, some of the most beautiful people on the planet, the Samburu. And often when I show this picture to people, I say, what do you see? What do you see? And everybody says, yeah, these are amazing, beautiful women. They're standing there, they're very tall and they're very elegant. And then I say, please look a bit closer. They're tall, they're elegant, they're vain, There we say in Dutch, they're idle. They spend all day grooming themselves. They have these little mirrors. They're playing with their beads. They spend, like ballerinas, they walk around these mountains. Their hair is long. It's all beaded. They're undoing and folding their skirts. You don't get more effeminate than this. But the irony is that they are warriors. Not only are they warriors, they have been known to kill lions with their bare hands. So when lions regularly attack their form of transportation, the camels, they can physically go after them, and with no knife and with no rope, they would be known to kill lions with their bare hands. And I found this most profound experience, that here you have these beautiful, effeminate, transvestite sort of Africans prancing around the bush, but they are the most finely tuned human beings you could ever imagine. They're so strong, and they're so skilled, and they're so focused. And they're the antithesis of what we were designed to be as human beings. Yet at the same time, they're very vain and idle. And it completely disorientated me, because it presented me with something, a massive question. I'd seen something in one way, but it turned out to be something completely different. So what I'd like to share with you is, this is one example. It's a very fine example. But this is how we often, in the developed world, we have a very, very prejudged view of how we see things. We put everything in boxes. It's far easier. And it's very difficult not to do that in the environment that we live in. It's very fast, it's very developed, and we have to think very quickly. But with this little example, please use it as an opportunity to stop and think and see things perhaps from a slightly different perspective. Don't necessarily judge it for what it is from its face value. And this is a very special story. Wild part of the world. I don't know, have any of you ever heard of Chukotka? Chukotka is a province, it's the furthest remote province of far northeastern Siberia, opposite Alaska. To explain how remote it is, it's a 13-hour non-stop flight from Moscow. Getting there, you land, that's if you land safely, unlike this aircraft which didn't land safely. I was looking for the Chukchi, and the Chukchi are, as I perceive, the world's last indigenous living and looking Eskimos. I was told there are only about 60 of them left living in the tundra. So off I go on my mission. I arrive there, and I had a contact, and I said, oh, we're going to go and find the Chukchi, and I've got my schedule, and I've got my budget, and I'm going to be back on this date. And they presented me with this tank, and then the guide said, well, sort of, and I said, well, when are we going to find them? When are we going to find the last Chukchi? And he said, well, good question. I don't know. Oh, well, that's the problem. He said, well, yeah, and where are they? He said, well, I don't know that either. They're there somewhere. And he said, is that a problem for you? And I said, well, I have to pay, spend my money, and I have my budget, I have my schedule, and I have my time, and people are waiting for me to come back, and I need my 60 Chukchi for my project. He goes, well, it's going to be interesting. You know, I can't guarantee we're going to find you the Chukchi. So immediately you're being confronted by, you know, with my orders and my schedules, and there's this Chukchi guide who I've been in contact with from Holland, who lived in the city, and he said, well, you know, trust me, let go. You're here. You're in the edge of the world. Let's see what happens. And you never know. You may be surprised. So we've got our tank. We lived in that for 1.5 months. The outside temperatures were minus 50. The inside temperatures were the better part of minus 30, and it didn't go faster than 10 kilometers an hour. And off we went into the tunnel. And I said to the guide who sat on the roof of the tank most of the day in these minus 50 degrees temperatures, which was extraordinary, I said, how are we going to find them? He said, well, it's quite simple. We're going to follow the reindeer droppings. We're going to follow the reindeer droppings. Right, okay. Can you explain that to me? He said, well, they're obviously reindeer herders, and I can tell by the age of the dropping and it's spreading where they've moved to. But again, there's no particular plan to it, so that's what we're going to do. So off we went in our tank with our guide sitting on top in minus 50 degrees centigrade, lots of tin meat and bottles of vodka and frozen bread. And that was about it. And we started to trust for probably one of the first times in my life I'd actually let go in a process. This is how we ended up most mornings, waking up in the tank. Sorry if you can't see it there. The snow would come into the tank. It was quite extreme experience. We were traveling for a month. here you can see my cameraman who came with me, Bram, and then the guy who's sitting on top, and this is how he sat all day driving over the tundra. And eventually we see the yorangas, these fantastic traditional teepee tents made out of 80 reindeer skins. And we saw it on the other side of the valley. And you must imagine the experience if you spent a month sitting in a tank, going 10 kilometers an hour, fueled on vodka and tinned beef. The driver broke his leg on the way, and we wedged it into the throttle with these pieces of wood. And it's the most odd experience I've ever. And then living in this sardine box. And then eventually you see the tent. Now, I can't explain to you how exciting it is to see a tent. But if you've gone through that experience, this is like arriving in New York. So we arrived there, and I jump off, and we found them, yeah, this is it. I was, yeah, where are we going? And immediately the elder came out, and he looked at me, and he grabbed my hand, and he said, listen. And I was, yeah, listen, ready to go. If you don't listen to me, and this was translated, and do exactly what you say, you're about to die. I said, oh, I'm about to die. I already feel about half dead. He said, you have to begin to live with us immediately. So there's no questions, no answers, no handshaking, no. It's you, and we have a job for you. Go and find wood straight away. So we got off having spent a month in this tank, and we were sent within a minute of arriving over the hill to go and find wood. So, but I've just found you, and you're sending me away, So basically, the long story short was that we were at the very, very end of the world, and this community, with zero judgment, said, you're human beings, and without us you're going to die, and we're going to teach you, come into our community. And they enveloped us. It was the most fantastic experience. So we started to live with them. Very, very, very beautiful, very proud people, living in a very traditional way. And after a while, we were there about 2 weeks, and as you imagine, we'd been away from home a long time by now, and my wife was probably beginning to wonder whether I was ever going to come back. And towards the end of we started talking. I said, guys, how did you end up here? You are so remote. You are so far away from everything else on the planet. And they said, well, it's very interesting. We know why we're here. We chose to be here. I said, you chose to be here? What do you mean you chose to be here? Yeah, no, we made a very objective choice, and we'll explain to you why. A couple of years ago, the authorities had decided indigenous people in this particular part of the world, we were too primitive and we shouldn't be here. So they very kindly said, you know what, we're going to provide you with an apartment in the nearest city. Now, the nearest city is a month that way on the mountains. And on the 8th floor, block 4, they were given, there were 60 of them, a whole sort of apartment. It's great, you've got TV, and we'll give you a skidoo, and we'll give you unending vodka. And the kids can go in the basement down there, and the question, the old people will go in that building because we don't need them anymore. And they thought, well, maybe this is how it should be. So they all packed up and off they went to the city. And they ended up living in an environment like this. And they said, after a short period of time, we became unhappy. And I said, oh, and so we disintegrated as a community, our whole existence, and we became very unhappy. We weren't living together, we weren't doing anything. So we decided to turn around and go back. I said, you've decided to come back and live in a tent at the edge of the world, where 11 months of the year it's snow and ice and it's minus 14, 15 degrees centigrade. And all the people started nodding, yeah, we're happier here. And we'll explain to you why we're happier here. Because when we left here, we were so in balance with our surroundings. We were so in balance in ourselves. We were so aware of how we lived with one another, with ourselves, with our environment, with the nature. And we didn't know what that meant until we lost it. We were withdrawn, we were given the choice to go to the other side, and we realized what it was like not to have it. So we chose to come back. Now this existence we have here is 10 times tougher, 10 times harder, physically very, very demanding, but it gives us such a purpose. We feel so human, we feel so healthy, because we interact with one another, we are in balance with ourselves, and to cut a very long story short, we feel a lot happier. So I started coming to the conclusion that we all have a choice. They have a choice, no matter how extreme it is, and we often forget that in this environment, in the developed world. We think, well, this is it. Well, it isn't. It really, really isn't. If you dare feel deep inside what you want, if you dare feel who you are, and it's very difficult to, if you've never had that before, never been in that environment, you can choose to do exactly what you want to do that will make you happy. Now, this is an extreme story. I know that, and we're not all about to go out and travel around Chukotka for a month in the tank in the middle of the woods. But by putting myself in that environment, by having experienced that experience, I began to question myself and how I lived, and I took it as a very profound experience. Okay, the last of my observations. This is one of the most beautiful parts of the world, and I don't know whether any of you have been there, but if you haven't, you have to put it on your list and start saving now. Not only is it the most beautiful part of the world, they're some of the most extraordinary people I've ever met, and I will explain to you why. This is the Altai Mountains in far northwestern Mongolia, bordering Kazakhstan. And in the Altai Mountains are my Hollywood heroes. There are these extraordinary men and women called the Kazakhs. Now, the Kazakhs as a nation, there are millions of them in Kazakhstan itself, but traditional Kazakhs, of which there are only a few hundred, live on the other side of the border in the mountain. And they're these hunters. They get given these eagles when they're teenagers as boys, and they spend the whole of their life training these eagles, and the eagles become part of them. These eagles have these 5-meter wingspans, and they travel with them over the mountains hunting for foxes and for rabbits. And it's the most glorious tradition you've ever seen in your life. And they're some of the most handsome, proud, beautiful people I've ever come across. So, as always, I had this idea, this image, and I had it actually for years. I knew about this place, but I never actually managed to get there. I wanted to get these eagle hunters on top of a mountain range very, very early in the morning. I wanted to get them standing there on their horses with their eagles on their arms, with these fantastic vistas going out behind them. Very early in the morning. Again, I wanted it in the winter because the landscape and the weather is the most dramatic. But it's quite an expedition getting them up on top of the mountain. So I managed to persuade them, this one group of people I've been with for a while. I said, guys, come with me early in the morning. We're going to go up. We're going to go up on top of the mountain. But this is the third morning. The first 2 mornings there was no sunrise. So how do you explain to people who you've got up at 2 o'clock in the morning to get dressed, to get on your 4 hours walk up this mountain, minus 30 degrees centigrade with wind chill factor? You've been blown and buffeted around, and then you sit in there and stand on your horse, and I'm really with my camera. No, I'm sorry, no, it's not going to happen. Sorry, so shoes cancelled, we're all going back down. And then you see these guys. So it means for what I've developed a relationship with them where we found some form of understanding with them. So on the third morning, eventually we get up, they've still followed me up. I mean, that's such an extraordinary experience. That these people who I've not paid, they're getting nothing from me. All they're getting is, and we'll discuss that later in a minute with question, all they feel is pride and honour that I'm running around in my eccentric style. Oh, wait, they're coming, it's beautiful, it's beautiful. And they enjoy that. I've given them a dignity. So here we are, the third morning, we've got back up there, and the sun's about to rise. And yes, this is what I want. So I get all excited. I put my tripod up, this stupid old technical camera, and everything's ready, and I've got my plate film all lined up here, and I'm looking around me, and I'm going, stand still, don't move, and the wind's blowing like this, and not that they said it, you could hear them saying, what the earth is he on about, don't move, and the wind's buffeting backwards and forwards. And I stupidly take off my gloves again. I go to the camera to change the lens. My fingers stick to the lens. This is because it's a plate camera, the lens is sheet metal. And they stick because of the temperature. So I think, I pull them off. By pulling them off, I left all the skin behind. And they started to freeze. They were already cold. And I started to panic. I started to panic out of desperation, out of pain, out of complete, I was spoiled. This is what I wanted to do. This is where I spent, as you've just heard, the better part of my life trying to get into this position. Why, I'm not sure. And it's about to happen in front of me, and I can't function. I can't function. And I start to cry. And I start to cry out of pain, but a combination of pain, desperation. I was exhausted. I was stressed. I was on this crazy project. I've left my family behind, and here I am, and this is exactly what I want to capture. This is what I've dreamed of, and I can't physically do it. So I really started to cry, and I started sobbing and waving my hands around and flailing. And I was completely unaware, and I didn't care anymore what people thought of me. The men remained, and I turned around by accident, and 2 women had followed us up the mountain out of curiosity, and they decided, what are these men going to do every morning at 2 o'clock, walking off into the night? It's better we go and follow them. So there they are, and they looked at me like this, and they're these beautiful women with these fantastic sort of foxskin jackets on and these hats. And one of the women beckoned me over like this, and I sort of flailed over, and she grabbed my hands, opened the jacket, and put them on her breasts. And the other woman opened her jacket from behind, and she cuddled me, and they rocked me like a child. They started humming to me and singing to me. I melted. I couldn't be like a child. Essentially what I wish my mother had done to me when I was a child when she sent me off to boarding school. And here I am at the age of 44, standing on top of a mountain with fingers, and these two women who I didn't know their names, of a complete other culture on the other side of the world, were giving me the empathy, giving me the warmth that I'd been wanting the whole of my life. And there I am standing on top, and they're cuddling me, they're holding me, they're rocking me. 2 or 3 minutes later, there's some semblance of feeling coming back in my fingers, and very selfishly, I'm ready now. Push them away and go back to my camera. And there the Cossacks are still standing there. They're still standing there. I'm saying, what? And I'm like, stop. And then I make a couple of pictures, of which that was one of them. I've got my picture, didn't think anything about it, didn't say thank you, which I normally do. I try to be very courteous in English. And we started walking down the mountain. And then something happened. There was a realization. This is a culture. This is an Islamic culture. That means that they had let go of all form of tradition, let go of all form of how we perceive them, to help me in my vulnerability, to help me in my moment of desperation. So the men had let the women let me touch them in the most intimate way to protect me, and why, I don't know. Why, they had no idea what I was doing or what I wanted to do. But they were willing from one human being to another to help me. So the moral of this story is, and that's what I began to learn on this journey after journey, the more vulnerable you become, and the more you dare bare yourself, the more you dare metaphorically take your clothes off and present yourself in your most humble, fragile, vulnerable, passionate way, wherever you are in the world, you will be able to connect with someone. You will be able to start communicating with them. And this was what happened time and time again. The remoter I went, I took translators with me, but invariably they could not communicate with the people I wanted to photograph. Because in the world there are about, if I'm right in saying, I'm sure somebody will correct me, about 7,000 official languages, but if you imagine there are another 1,001 dialects of each language. So you arrive there, but your translator can say hi and bye and count to 10. But for the rest it's up to me. And in a way that's the way it should have been, because I was the one trying to communicate. I was the one with an objective. It was up to me. If you have a translator, you delegate it. You don't interact. But if I can't speak your language, but I want you to do something, I'll go to the limits of my human capability to find a form of communication. And then next to that, I'm taking these crazy pictures with this stupid old camera. So you completely, you enter a form of communication on another level, a level I didn't know existed. And this story is an extreme story, and I relate it quite a few times, but it's the antithesis of what I started to experience and started to find. Okay, so I've related three stories. They're not necessarily morals, but they're emotional experiences that I had. One was about judgment. I feel so strongly, please, I don't expect you to go off to the sunroofs and wait there in the morning having you standing on top of a mountain top. Please look twice. More often than not, something is not what it may seem to be. Next to that, the idea of choice. Through my extreme circumstances in Chukotka, I learned that we as human beings can choose. Those people choose in the most extreme circumstances. They chose for themselves. They chose for them because they said, this is what makes me feel complete. This is what makes me feel happy. So we have no excuse to say we can't choose. And then thirdly, the idea of vulnerability. And it's very difficult, and I know that, I also find it extremely difficult. But if you dare show yourself, if you dare put yourself as you are, the chances of you being able to communicate with somebody are very, very high, even when you can't speak that language. So with these stories, what I want to say is these people are very special. These cultures, these tribes, however you want to call them, they have something which is very important to us. And we have to be aware of that. I'm starting with, in my context, at the beginning of this project. I'm making an aesthetic. It's a very romantic, it's a very subjective document. But there's a very, very profound reason why. I feel this is where we began. I feel this is our origins. I feel that this is very, very significant to us. And we're about to lose it. Believe me. I spent my whole life traveling, as I'm sure many of you have. This ethnicity, this beauty, this original form is going very, 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 very quickly. And due to digitalisation, we were never further than 2 days away from the internet. In the very near future, these people are going to have smartphones. And they're going to look on their smartphones and they're going to think, oh, this is a load of rubbish what we have. We're going to go that way. We're going to go into the developed world. Now, I'm not saying that shouldn't happen. I'm not saying put them in a glass box. That's not our right to do this. They have all the choice. They can have everything that we have if they want. But what I am asking is that we have to form a dialogue with them. We have to say, which is what I'm going to try and do with the first book I've made. I'm going to be going back to them with a film, and I want to start a discussion with them. I say, guys, do you realise what you have? Do you realise what you are? I don't think they do. I may be wrong and it may be patronising, but they're not aware of the wealth they have. A wealth of emotional power, a wealth of emotional beauty, and a balance that I really believe we've lost. Now we have also something that's very profound. So it's not that you have to remain there on top of the mountain standing with the bone going through it. But at the same time, don't abandon it all and come completely to where we are, because we've lost something. We have a material wealth, but I really believe we've lost an enormous emotional wealth with ourselves and with our communities. So what I'm hoping is to try and create a dialogue with them and a dialogue with us to try and readdress that balance as best as possible by making these very romantic, very idealistic, very subjective, but that's essentially what all photography is, point of view of the world's last and most beautiful people on the planet. Thank you very much. And this is the introduction of my project before they pass away. The title is very manic, it's very dramatic. They're not going to die, we all know that. But it's to represent that that something will die. We have to be very, very aware of what is about to die, and that is their culture. So that is why the title is very dramatic, to get our attention and start asking questions about it. I'm very happy if people want to throw things at me. Shoot.
You mentioned a couple times that you were using this plate camera, this large format camera. Had you gone there with something, let's say, very contemporary digital camera, do you think it would have forged a different relationship?
Did everybody hear that question? Why was I using the old traditional 4x5 and sometimes 10x plate camera and not digital? Okay, two very, very important reasons why. The first reason is the aesthetic of the end result. When you enlarge these images and you blow them up, the difference between film and pixelated imagery is extraordinary. You don't see that online, you don't see that in a magazine. But a film and grain at this level has so much more soul, there's no comparison. When I start exhibiting these pictures, I'm going to try and make examples to illustrate this between the same picture made digitally and the same picture made on film. But the most important aspect is how you... Can I have some... Do you want to come here?
Sure.
Sorry, I'm not going to do anything crazy. I'm just going to use you as an example.
Okay.
Sorry, what's your name?
Janice.
Janice. Hi, Janice. Okay, I'm going to take a picture of Janice. If I come in with a digital camera, invariably I probably don't bother getting out of the car or the helicopter. I put it on a long lens, it's a bit dark, I raise the ISO and I start shooting it. And there's very little interrelation. And I started to experience that myself as a photographer. So by going back in time, by going back essentially to a tripod, by going back to the stupid handmade technical camera because I wanted to make it light and malleable, by only having limited amount of film with me. Every trip I went on, I didn't take more than 100 sheets of film. So you can imagine, you're really in a zone, you're really focused, you don't just make pictures of anything, you're very, very selective on what you make pictures of. Then, the film is 50 ISO, for example. So it's very slow film, very non-light sensitive. So if I'm taking a portrait of you inside, and we did that with reflectors, it's all about reflecting light from the outside. You've got a shutter speed of sometimes 3 or 4 seconds. So to get you still on such a large frame, I have to have a relationship with you, with all due respect. I have to have learned to communicate. I have to have got your trust. And you have to sit with me. You have to be very, very, very still. So I spend sometimes hours, sometimes days, weeks touching you. I tell you how beautiful. I hold your chin. So I spend days, and you'll find when you get into that process and you see and you start sweating as I am now, and you start getting excited. Oh, you're beautiful. Wow, it's great. You get reflected there. That the sitter likes it. It's all about vanity. It's all about pride. And often you would arrive in a village, and especially in Africa, you'd be running in, all these people who run around with guns and be sort of kicking me and then intimidating you. They're never going to hurt you, but they're trying to assert their authority. And then you become like a dog. You're very small. And you get down, you go, you're right, you're the important. And then eventually you find somebody in the group who's a bit curious. What on earth is this strange person doing here? And then this one person you start relating to, put them on a chair. And then you're communicating in a different way. And then you start making, and people love it. People love the attention. Now what always happened, 10 times out of 10 was I was never allowed to leave the village until I'd spent days photographing everybody on that. So you go with 100 sheets of 4x5 film, and I spent days, and I promise you on weeks on occasion, just putting in empty cartridges. I don't know how I'm going to tell them that when I come back. Because I didn't have enough film, because everybody wanted me to touch their chin. Everybody wanted me to fiddle. And if somebody sat there shorter than the person before, and they get angry with me, they start pushing me around. You understand? It's a very strange experience. And so that's doing the portraiture inside. And then you started with the portraiture, and then you would explain, you find an environment or a landscape or a waterfall or a mountain. Come with me, and we're going to stand on top. And the same thing happened there. Very, very, very slow. You go right down, and then you compose the picture. And then they've understood that there's this manicness, there's this intensity that it takes to make these pictures. And I always put them on a pedestal, so I was always lower than they were. So that's very significant. When you have, I'm relatively tall and perhaps a bit strange looking, when you have a big Nikon with a long lens and walk around like this, it's a very, very aggressive approach. But if you invert it, put yourself on the floor, and then look up to whoever they are, the dignity you give them in how you relate is also in the photography. So that was the long answer to your question. But that was essentially why. Does everybody understand?
Yes.
You're so interesting, man. You know,
I don't want to look in the mirror. I guess I'm getting straight. But anyway.
And my hair happens the same way. No, what I wanted to say, Jimmy, is that I look at, I see pictures of places I've been, 25, 30 years ago, and it's sad for me to see how people there have forsaken their traditional attire and embraced American, European attire. For me, I said, what was beautiful about going there was seeing them in their traditional attire. Now, I'm not an elephant that feel that things are not going to change. But they, you see with the hat on backwards when I go up in the Bronx, I see that. You know what I mean? And it's just heartbreaking for me to see.
It is. I think everybody heard that. It is changing radically.
Yeah.
And everywhere where I went, and I'm sure some of you have been to a number of the places, this is the very end of what it is. So in the majority of the cases, like the Huli Warriors on the waterfall, they're only 5%. The rest of them have all gone to the city. What do you do about it? And I have a sort of a controversial point of view, and I'm going to share it with you. So don't throw tomatoes at me if you disagree, but it's just my opinion. There are two things that are going to happen, and they're guaranteed. And both of them it's the lesser of two evils, if you put it in a way. An evil is a bit a dramatic point of view. But they're either going to, as you said, put on a t-shirt and run off to the city, or they're going to be forced there by an authority or a government, and that is probably most of the cases. It's all about mining and stripping the land. So it's not their fault, per se. Or there's another option, and this is a very controversial point of view. They stay where they are. They stay in the environment that they live in. They stay as close to their traditions and their customs as possible. But perhaps a way of earning money is through tourism. And I experienced this on a couple of occasions, of places where I've been back to twice. And the first time I went there, it was pure, as we can see what pure is. And the second time I went to there, it wasn't as pure as it was, but they were still there, or an element of the culture was still there. And they were earning an income through tourism. Now, that's very controversial, because then is it a real culture? Is it a real And the only thing which is disappointing about it for future visitors is you have this romantic idea of what it once was, and you get there and you find it's not that anymore. But for their point of view, it's not a bad thing, because they're still earning an income, they're still in their natural environment, they're still not the way they were, but none of us were the way we were. I mean, look back in time and history, we've all been evolving, and this is perhaps a sort of a natural evolution. But it's important, and even if they become a tourist attraction, even if it becomes a novelty, that novelty is more important than not having it at all.
I noticed that.
But it's a controversial point of view, because it's a bit patronising. You stay there and earn money. Well, yeah, I mean, but it is, many of these places are fantastic, and they live like the people who've chosen to go. They are actually very, very happy there, because it's all about this balance.
I noticed that what I've seen, the women tend to hold on to tradition a lot longer in their attire. It seems to be
I found
the men.
I found it wasn't for me, that wasn't consistent.
Oh, really?
Some cultures yes, some cultures no. If you look through the book to date, people often ask, did you fake the clothing? Now, 80% of what you see in the book is what they still wear. 20% is their festival dress, the big hats of the Papua New Guineans that obviously don't go to bed with these extraordinary hats. But there wasn't a consistency between male and female. Some cultures yes, some cultures no. I mean, like the Samburu, you know, the men were probably the most vain, less the women.
And just one more question. Did you, because you didn't talk about the transition from the first camera to the view camera. Did you take classes, or did you?
No, we say in Dutch,
yourself?
autodidact, self-taught.
Oh, okay.
After 16, halfway now 18, that's the last time I went to school.
Oh.
Good thing and a bad thing. I think it suits me as a personality. I'm very much, I think photography is not about the camera, it's about what you're trying to communicate. And this camera is an example. You can buy pieces of it on the internet for nothing. It doesn't cost anything. It's all about what you want to communicate and how you see it. And I have to learn from my own mistakes, and I'm still making many mistakes on a daily basis. But that's how I learn the best. I don't like somebody to tell me what to do. And much the same as now, I'm standing here communicating with you a story. I'm sure some of what I say is perhaps wrong. I'm not going to apologise for that, because it's what I feel and what I've seen. But that's how I'm going to carry on learning. I met somebody here this evening who's invited me for something else, and I'm sure I'll meet on those people there, and they'll start teaching me new things. But that's my process of learning. I put myself in a new situation, do some things correctly, do some things wrong, and then keep learning as you go. And that's how I did it with photography. And still learning, and still, I look through the book now, and I see an enormous amount of mistakes that I want to do and correct and make better and better and better and better. But also, it's another answer to your question about using the camera. The excitement, the adrenaline rush of going to the other side of the world with 100 sheets of film and not seeing what's on this film until you get back home. It's the wildest. You don't get a higher buzz,
right.
And you made this picture, you have it, did I get what I want? But that also means that when you're making them, you're in a zone. You're in the ultimate, and if you want meditation and you want happiness, I don't know whether you are we're all actually photographers nowadays, but getting into that zone, and it's so exciting. It's so exciting. You're slowing down the shutter speed, and to get the waterfall running, and to get them all standing there, and then you're waiting, and you're hoping nobody moves, and you're looking who's blinking, and it's like this sort of, you're like a sort of a conductor. You've got these 5 guys standing, and he keeps ticking every 4 seconds, so you've got to get the shutter right before he's ticking. And there was also one example of a picture. Can you turn down the lights a little bit? This is a very funny story. I'll go back.
I think, yeah, we're gonna get a second.
This picture. Can anybody see this picture?
No.
Well, it's a tree, and in the tree there's a family. In the tree there's a family, and this is the Dasanek in southern Omo Valley in Ethiopia. And this is so fun to me. This is very soft evening light as the sun is setting. So I get there and I see these beautiful people. And I think, right, I want to make a sort of a family tree. But first of all, how do you communicate with them? Well, you can't directly. And then the family's coming, and then you start, if you put them too early in the tree, they get bored. If you put them too late in the tree, you miss the sun, because the sun's setting here. And then you're busy with the tree, you're busy with the composition, you're busy with putting the goats in the middle to get the eye, and it's all preconceived to get the eye. The young girls on top to show the youth, the wisest man in the middle, you've got to be diplomatically correct, and etc. So you're busy with this long conversation, sticks and everything, and then you're waiting for the sun to go down, you're waiting for this, come on, let's start climbing the trees. Everybody starts climbing the tree. The tree's full of ants, which you don't realise until the sun's everybody's like this. I say, stay still, the sun shuts its speed, the sun shuts its speed, and they're all sort of. And then eventually they get used to the ants, and then just before you're about to make the picture, these girls start fighting at you. And her friend's here, and she wants to sit next to her. She doesn't want to sit next to her because last week she fell out with her. So you're dealing with this whole dynamic, and it's so exciting. And then as the sun's going down, he walks off, and this goat bites this goat in the bottom. And then he starts shouting, and then he goes shh, 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 shh. But that buzz, that excitement of getting that, well, this is one image, just one image of one face, and just as the sun's going down, just 1 second, and still bang. And you'll see it later, a number of them are bloomed, but that's also beautiful. It gives the image depth. There's this movement of focus. And it's a very selfish, very indulgent experience as well. It's a very sort of, you relate to them and to yourself. And there's an anecdote I'm going to share with you now. Bear with me, have a bit of a sip. Somebody earlier today was saying to Jimmy, said, yeah, it's all fine and well, you whist all these bases, and you have all these opinions, but aren't you a bit of a hypocrite? So that's an interesting question. He explained, so well, you live in a city, you've got 3 kids, and you live a very comfortable life, and they've developed one, you're all going, you're preaching, sorry, I don't mean to be preaching, but it sounds as if you're preaching. I said, well, you're right, but I'm not going to take my children and put them in that environment because this is their life and this is their culture. But what I try and do is try and learn some of the lessons and try and impose them on the environment where my domestic situation is. So there's one nice story I'll share with you that happened a few weeks ago. Well, there are 2 stories. The first one is very similar to this one. And I used this one, and I said I want to do something like this similar in my own hometown. So I've got 3 kids, 17, 14, and 11 is the youngest one. She's coming to the last year of her school in the junior school. I went to the headmaster and I said, I want to make a group picture of all the kids. And he said, oh, Jimmy, Jesus, you know, we're busy, there's no money, nobody wants a group picture, and we're all photographers, we don't need you. Yeah, but I want to make a special picture. Oh, I'm sure they're special pictures, Jimmy. They're always special, your pictures. But at the moment, we don't need it. Thank you very much. And I was a bit upset. He said, yeah, but I want to make this picture. So I said, well, if you let me do it, and all the costs are on me, there's no, I said, well, fine, but realise you're in our way. You're disturbing the process. We're busy here, everything should carry on. So anyway, I sent an email off. 2 weeks later, 300 kids turned up on the school square wearing white. And I said, I want them to look in a uniform. So everybody's like, oh, Jesus, Jimmy, leave us alone. Kids were all there. I took them onto the school square, and there's this grass field, and I organised the fire brigade. And because I wanted to photograph them from the sky. So with 300 kids standing in white, me in a sort of in a bucket being raised by the firemen, and there I am above them looking down. Same similar idea. And then I said to the fireman next to me, I said, pull down my pants. And he goes, pull down my pants down. And you're going. I said, just pull my pants down. All of a sudden he yanked my pants down, and in that split second all 300 children burst out laughing. And I got the picture. Although I shot it digitally. I wasn't going to risk it. Because I'd got a headmaster chasing off. I told you so. So now I've got this beautiful picture of 300 children laughing, dressed in white, looking up into the sky. A week later, I framed it 1 by 2 meters, put it in the hall of the school. I promise you, there's not one day that goes by that a parent doesn't come up to me, touches me, says, thank you, Jimmy, for giving me that objectivity. Thank you by making that effort, by making that simple picture. You've provided, as I said, an objectivity of what I do here every day. We run, we both work. We dump our kids here. I don't know how it works here, education-wise. The teachers there early, nothing. 8 o'clock in the morning, we come back at 7 o'clock at night. We're not grateful. And you've made one little picture, you've hung it on the wall, and every morning we walk past it warms us. It makes us smile, it makes us appreciate who we are, what our community is, how important our teachers are to us, how important our children are to us. So that's, in a way, how I try and learn the lessons or apply the lessons I've learned by these experiences in the environment that I live in. Next to that, there's another small anecdote. Somebody rang me a few weeks ago and they said, Jimmy, we saw your book, great. I said, oh, thank you very much. I said, I have a problem. I will tell you. So my dad is about to die. And in Holland we have euthanasia. And he's got cancer, we're going to give him morphine in a couple of days, and I want you to make a picture of it. And I said, okay. Busy schedule, but this is important. See, but the problem is even bigger than that. There are 30 of us in the family. I want a family group shot. like, oh, okay, it's getting complicated. I don't want to wear white, do you? No. But there's another problem. We don't really like each other. Right, okay, that's the serious problem. But I think by looking in your book, if you can make pictures of those people, you must be able to make a picture of our family. So I thought, this is exactly what I want. Here I'm beginning to succeed. I'm beginning to succeed in communicating what I feel. These people are not, this family doesn't interest in cultures or traveling, but these pictures that emotionally, how do you say, affected this lady. Off I went to this family, it was on Sunday morning, and you've got these 30 fairly people all walking around, and there's Grandpa, and put him on the couch, but careful my points here, Grandpa, put him on the couch, and Grandpa's sort of about to die. And I cover Grandpa and these 30 family members, and everybody says, it's very awkward. And I said, good morning everybody, I'm here to make a picture. I haven't been paid for this job this morning, I'm doing it out of my own free will, but you have to do something for me, and if you don't do it, I'm not going to press the shutter. I said, you have to hold each other's hands. And if I can't see you being connected to one other person next to you, I'm not going to press the shutter. So even more, and then a bit of shifting, and then a bit of shifting, and then it's exactly the same here. And then eventually, by being patient, they all held hands. And what happened is they all started to cry. And that, again, was for me, a very profound experience, but also for them. And it showed that by taking time, by creating that objectivity, by observing, by caring, by not judging, by me being vulnerable, by them being vulnerable, you make something very, very special. So that's a way I try to, and I'm far from perfect, but try to apply what I've learned on my own life and try and inspire you by the pictures I'm trying to make and the story I'm trying to communicate.
Did you anticipate that reaction?
I'm beginning to see that that's possible, and it's also indulgent. I mean, going back to my personal story, by having a cold youth, I want emotion, I want connection, and I'm looking for it. And I'm beginning to see by using the camera, I get that, and it makes me happy. And I don't solve anything, but it makes each day more valuable, and I like that. That makes it very profound. The episode within the school. There's another nice anecdote about that. If you want to, it's very funny. So you've got this picture hanging in the school of all these kids, and one morning I was standing in the square, and a couple of people. So there's an element of self. I don't know how you want to describe it. And this little boy walks out. He's 6. He's one of the small ones. He walks out in the square, and his parents standing in a circle having a chat on a Friday afternoon, and he points his finger and he goes, "You're the photo man." Yeah, you're the photo man, right. And you can see him, he's had a lot of thought about this, and he takes a deep breath and then he waves his finger, and he's about to ask the question again, and then the longer he takes to ask the question, the more we're on, we're all sort of on, and eventually he asks, "Are we going to see your Willie next time?" So he's very, very small. And what was very funny is half the parents had heard what had happened. So half went, ha ha ha. The other half hadn't heard, and they said, "Oh, you did." And you could see them sort of backing across. So sort of pervert photography. But again, that's another odd experience and beautiful to have, and that all through taking pictures and making time to communicate.
That's great.
Yeah.
Some of these tribes probably don't know what a photograph is. So when you're sitting there with this machine, this box, and even if you've got them with the chair and the chin, they don't know what you're doing.
I would hazard a guess that 80% of them didn't want to picture this. 80% of them don't know what the book is. It's all about vanity.
Did you bring any samples of the book?
No, because I didn't show them any pictures. It's all about a relationship. It's all about vanity, because it's all about, most of them didn't know what a camera was, or why I was making the pictures. But it was about me worshipping. It was about me putting them on the table. It was about me.
Even just the process and the act without the end result.
Yeah, because it's not about an end result. It doesn't matter. They don't have pictures of themselves, so what difference is it going to make? But they love the process of me, and I love the process of putting them on a pedestal. And there's nothing more exciting. I don't know how many of you are busy with photography, but there's nothing more exciting than seeing a face that's beautiful and seeing how the light falls on it and paints it, and the relationship you can have with it, and the beauty that you're trying to capture. And slowing yourself down with this old camera, and you really get into a process, and it's a very, very special experience. And it's not about the picture, but as I said, in the end, often the whole village will be queues around outside. It's my turn to have a picture made, because people want to sit and people want to, which is very special. But I think isn't that the same for all of us? You want attention, you all want somebody to say you're great. The other day I made this TED talk in Amsterdam, there were a couple of thousand people in the biggest hall, and the lady was helping it, just said, Jimmy, you look great. And that one sentence gave me, filled my lungs full of oxygen. I walked onto the stage. That's all she had to say. And whether she believed it or not, or whether it's true or not, is irrelevant. The fact that she communicated it. I'm okay. And that's actually, maybe that's the journey I'm on from my childhood, by being not abandoned, but I'm still looking for this contact, still looking for this. I don't know.
I think we have time for maybe one more question.
I don't have a question. I just want to say, in a world of arrogance and me and this and that, I think you're a perfect person.
Oh, excuse me.
Thank you so much. We are going to be having Jimmy sign books tonight. If you guys would all remain seated until we call you up by row, we're going to have him signing in the back corner over there. We're going to be calling up your row just after we've got everything settled. Thank you so much for coming up tonight, and let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you ever so much, everybody, for being here. And it's very special to have these experiences, and it's nice that you listen. It's nice to be able to see you, and thank you for your participation.
Thank you.